we've got a really fantastic group of people with all of you. Just want to say we're recording this session so we can, you know, everybody can hear it again later. But if you're not happy with that, you can close down your video or rename yourself if you want. And while the presentation is going on, please mute yourself and keep muted unless you are about to speak. And if you wish to speak in the discussion, you can put your name in the chat box or put your hand up. And Kirill will call on you so we can have everybody speak in good order. And then you need to unmute yourself. I just want to say, my name is Corinna Lotz, and I'm part of the International Friends of Ilyenkov organizing group. And our webinar today is a departure from our usual focus on the work of Ilyenkov and his influence, which is what we've often got used to talking about. And today we're really thrilled to welcome Mikhail Epstein, who is professor of cultural theory and Russian literature at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Mikhail is a cultural theorist and philosopher, and he's opened up new areas of Soviet and Russian literature, criticism, and philosophy, especially for non-Russian readers. And he's had many prizes awarded to him in Russia, Europe, and the United States. And with this manifesto that we're looking at today, that he'll be speaking about, he's making a really inspiring call. Epstein, Mikhail operates with future-oriented notions of possibility, of multiplicity and of freedom. And he's in many ways extending Bakhtin's concepts of polyphony. And he's inviting us to rethink categories and concepts, in particular the notion or concept of metaphysics. And this is so refreshing in contrast to the kind of static, often backward-looking pessimism that we can see in various dogmatic forms of Marxism, as well as sociology. Mikhail's orientation, his concept of world-making, are reminiscent of some of the early Soviet imaginary about the possibilities of transforming life. And we can view that tradition in it, but transported to our time, to the 21st century, and in today's world, which is dominated by global capitalism. And with his sense of humor, Mikhail describes advertisements in New York as metaphysically loaded, which you've read in the reading. And I love this phrase, be the master of your destiny, likewise your bill payments. I see that as a good illustration of Ilyenkov's ideal and the real. Just to end up, I think Mikhail can be described as a philosophical artist who spurs us to think in new ways, which is particularly important and appropriate as we are theorizing, all of us, the reshaping of life during this time of pandemic. So that's just to try and give a little insight into some aspects of Mikhail's work. And he's going to speak, and after that, there'll be plenty of time for discussion. So over to you, Mikhail.
Thank you very much, Karina. I'm very grateful to you and to all those present for this opportunity to address some pressing issues in the methodology of those disciplines to which we have been devoting our lives and our intellectual efforts. I'm also grateful to Carol Emerson, I hope she is here, for her support of this direction of thinking and making a connection between, as you rightly observed, Bakhtinian legacy and contemporary issues in the methodology of the humanities. So what I would like to discuss with you today is the future of the humanities and the necessity of practical extension to the entire system of the humanities as we posit them now within the traditions of academic scholarship. It's not a secret that the humanities are undergoing deep crisis, which can be observed in the numbers of students and degrees in this academic area that is going down from the 1970s to our decade. It's almost 1/2 of the numbers of students and degrees in the humanities, BA degrees in the humanities, that make many acute observers to raise an issue. Will there be such intellectual institution and academic discipline in the future by the mid of the 21st century as the humanities? And there are many ways to blame capitalism, society, foundations, and many other businesses, many other external factors for this crisis of the humanities. But as humanists, we should first find some faults with ourselves. This is, so to say, self-reflexive gesture of proper for humanists. And the point is that humanities are, in the perception of society, more and more delving into the past and becoming isolated from the contemporary world, from technologies, from sciences, from the entire humanity in its orientation to the future. And of course, in this perspective or retrospective, the humanities turn more and more into a kind of collecting archives, reading and rereading commentaries to the glorious authors of the past, and so on and so on. How to add some productive and creative impulse to the humanities. This is the task that I have been preoccupied in some of my recent books, both in English and in Russian. And now I would like to share with you my PowerPoint presentation. And after that, of course, we will talk and let me first make sure that I see it. Okay, do you see it? Okay, great, great. First of all, probably I would like to start with the observation that the recent quite unique moment in the history of our species, in my view, I mean pandemic and the factors of self-isolation, are, in my view, favorable for the development of the humanities, because it is the moment of introspection, the moment of self-reflection, the moment when we as humans are presented with ourselves rather than with external world and its palpable real life forms of civilization. We have to ponder about what can we do, so to say, within our own houses and in front of our own monitors. And this, I would say, provides a new impetus for our creative imagination, because as you will see in the second half of my presentation, it is virtual worlds and online communication, which were so much triggered by the recent experiences that provide new opportunities for practical humanistic thinking. By limiting our external practices, so to say, our contacts with the physical world, they nevertheless provide the momentum for our new horizons for humanistic technologies. So, as you know, the sciences, the field of knowledge is traditionally divided into 3 branches, and natural sciences, social sciences, and the humanities, each with its separate object of investigation. And the 2 upper lines, natural sciences and social sciences, have very clear practical extensions to the knowledge that they develop. Natural sciences convert into technologies that transform precisely the world that is studied by natural sciences, the world of nature. Social sciences have the extension in the form of politics, and in plural, many politics, administrative politics, state politics, economic politics, geopolitics, and so on. But what about the humanities? What could be put instead of the question mark in this scheme? What is the field for the transformation of culture that we could designate as the practical extension of the humanities? This remains a big question mark. We don't know any group of practices that would develop on the basis of the humanities in the same way in which technologies develop on the basis of natural sciences, that would work on the practical application of our knowledge. Therefore, the necessity for the transformative humanities or transhumanities, the humanities that aim to transform the area of their studies. And this can be also called the art of the humanities, built on the premises of humanistic scholarship. To put it simply, when we offer a certain theory, we want to ask if it is able to create a new cultural or linguistic practice, an artistic movement, a disciplinary field, a new institution, a lifestyle, or intellectual community. What I mean here is not to replace scholarship with practical technologies, but I mean addition of technologies to existing scholarship. Like technologies don't replace natural sciences, but interact with them. Now the humanities are in the position in which physics, for example, or chemistry would find itself if there was science, but there would be no technologies, no airplanes, no rockets, no space investigation, no automobiles, nothing, just studying nature or biology, studying living nature, but no gardening, no forestry, nothing. You see, in this situation, we find today ourselves with the humanities. So, very simply simplifying, a task of literary scholarship, as far as its practical extension is concerned, is to project new ways of writing, of textuality. A huge task, keeping in mind that textuality now embraces actually all electronic universe. Yes, how to organize, assemble, disassemble, analyze, interpret this huge textual message. A task of linguistics to create new science, lexical units, grammatical models that would expand the richness and expressive power of language. A task of philosophy to construct new universals and universes, the the alternative worlds that will become tangible and habitable through the advance of technologies. This is very briefly and speaking that should be kept in mind. Now, the task of science in a very conservative, so to say, I would say, way is defined, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, as science involves the pursuit of knowledge covering general truths or the operations of fundamental laws. So science is knowledge. But what about thinking? For me, the opposition of knowledge and thinking is as important as for physics, the opposition of mass and energy. Knowledge is mass, thinking is energy. Our task is transform the mass of knowledge that we are accumulating through examination, through research, through all kinds of scholarship that we undertake in our universities into energy of thinking. That means coining, constructing those concepts, ideas that would creatively transform the universe, the culture, human world. And I would like to cite here Richard Lewontin, who is one of the most outstanding evolutionary biologists, who discusses the evolutionary process. He is a Darwinist, of course, and he also relies very heavily on Marx. It is not the case that environments have an autonomous set of laws and organisms discover them, meet them, and have to cope with them. But in fact, environments are a consequence of what Marx called the sensuous activity of organisms. Organisms have constructed the world in which we live. So it's not about adaptation, it's about construction or about certain interaction or complementarity between adaptation and construction. But if it is relevant about the world of living nature, about animals, about plants, how much more relevant this activity of organism or activity of our mind is to human practices, to human intellect. And here I would like to suggest that there are, like Lewontin suggested, adaptation versus construction. Knowledge is adaptation and thinking is construction. By knowledge, we adapt our consciousness to the existing world, to its laws, whereas by thinking, we transform these concepts in order to be able to transform the world. Adaptation is only a means for construction. Knowledge is the mind's adaptive mechanism by which thinking coordinates itself with the environment in order to transform it more effectively in accordance with human projections. Therefore, the field of the humanities is transformative rather than purely explorative. And here, I would like to suggest very simple distinction between discovery and invention in order to move to inventions in the next slides. Discovery is adaptation of our consciousness to reality. We discover something in reality. Invention is adaptation of reality to our consciousness. We invent something, we add this invention to the world around us. And if the entire enterprise of human mind, of humans and Homo sapiens would just be adaptation, we would still live in the caves because the entire world as we see it, except those trees and bushes that we can see in the window, the entire world, houses, computers, tables, cars, and so on, it is creation of human imagination, creation of human active thinking, transforming the world. So humanistic inventions are as important for cultural evolution as technological inventions are for material progress. And of course, according to this tripartite division of the field of knowledge, we could single out three kinds of inventions. Scientific and technological based on natural sciences like railroads, aviation, hybridization, computing, internet, and so on. Socio-political inventions corresponding to social sciences that radically change modes of social behavior, various institutions like parliaments, constitutions, trade unions, communism, Zionism, Red Cross, Olympic Games, United Nations, all these are social inventions. But then we are allowed to talk about humanistic inventions as well. If there is a separate branch of knowledge, the humanities, one of these three, there should be also some place for humanistic invention. Humanistic invention is a new idea that contains the potential of its own realization in the form of cultural practices, intellectual movements, and creative cooperation. And humanistic invention can be divided according to various cultural domains: language, literature, art, philosophy, and so on. Here are examples of humanistic inventions. I will not read this. I would suggest that this PowerPoint presentation could be placed on the web and you could familiarize yourself in more detail. But I just want to emphasize that even in such area as language, which seems to be quite natural, though there is nothing natural in culture, there is a huge space for inventions. And for example, Cyrillic alphabets and Armenian alphabets, artificial international languages, Esperanto, modern Hebrew. By the way, there are individual people who are behind these inventions. Inventions is mostly outcome of individual creative thinking, which of course encourages us to be daring in our humanistic intellectual creativity, literature, neoclassicism, romanticism, detective story, naturalism, philosophy, utopia, the overman, semiotics, phenomenology. There are people, inventors behind these inventions, existentialism, psychology, religion, and so on and so on. So we see that the humanities as we know them are the fields of humanistic inventions which are studied after. And by the way, if we look at one of the close areas to myself, literary studies, the major ideas in literary theory come not from monographs, unfortunately, for academic scholars, but from manifestos, manifestos of neoclassicism, romanticism, naturalism, symbolism, what is symbol, what is grotesque, what is futurism, postmodernism. All this comes from manifestos, which are not purely academic genre, but genre of humanistic projection. And now I would like, in the second part of my presentation, I will go to more specifically to philosophy. Philosophy is distinctive among all the humanities that its foundational unit is the world as a whole. Philosophy deals with the world as a whole. And respectively, philosophers speculated on what, because we have only one world so far, yes, the world that, so to say, surrounds us, that is within us. And so philosophers were in disagreement of what is the first principle of this world, water or fire, a universal or an individual, idea or matter, and so on and so on. But this is for the first time in the history of humanity that we are led to such a threshold, radical threshold in the history of our species, when we can create a multiplicity of alternative worlds. And John Turney writes in his Guide to the Future, one ultimate vision of IT future, information technology's future, is access to virtual worlds which are as rich as or richer than the everyday world. And we can imagine how the field of philosophy can expand immensely to embrace these newly created worlds each potentially endowed with its own laws and universals. What are the philosophical premises of virtual worlds? Even before you make a game, for example, a computer game, you need to raise and solve certain philosophical questions. Though, of course, the majority of those people who construct these primitive games, they are not well versed in philosophy, but nevertheless, they have to decide certain philosophical questions. How many dimensions does the world contain? What is the nature of time and space? And do they constitute one indivisible continuum? What are the relationship between subject and object and cause and effect? How many moves or hits are allowed for each avatar? What does constitute the conditions for each avatar's death or disappearance from the game? These are philosophical questions, questions of life and death, of determinism and indeterminism. And of course, this is the gigantic field of world making, where philosophy as the study of the world, as thinking about the world as the whole, has the privilege to participate. So we can now address a new relationship between philosophy and advanced technologies. In my view, one of the greatest moments today is the convergence between technology and philosophy. In the past, technology was preoccupied with material particulars, while taking care of specific human needs such as food, shelter, transportation, whereas philosophy, on the contrary, was preoccupied with big ideas, the first principle, essences, and universals. So technology used to be utilitarian, while philosophy was speculative. Today, technology and philosophy are moving ever closer towards each other. The power of technology is progressively extended to the fundamental properties of the universe, while philosophy becomes increasingly active in its ability to articulate these newly emerging properties. I call these new technologies ontotechnologies, onto meaning being, technologies that are able to transform being, to create alternative worlds, alternative universe. So ontotechnologies are those advanced technologies which promise to change the foundations of physical and mental existence and the way in which we experience it, to introduce a new sensory environment and modes of its perception, even a new spatial-temporal continuum, along with new genetically modified kinds of organisms and new digitally enhanced forms of intelligence. You know, in the past, philosophy was dealing with one world, with one mind, with one type of organism, with this one species that is capable of reasoning and at the same time is biological entity. Now we have the possibility for multiplication of all these, and therefore philosophy itself gets, for the first time in history, the opportunity to participate actively in the construction of these alternative universes, alternative minds, alternative organisms. Technologies are no longer applied tools, but ontologically committed technologies, making transformative advances into the micro and macro worlds, including the structure of the brain and DNA. Humans are becoming increasingly skillful in the art of world making. And this will transform the entire area of philosophy into an experimental and constructive branch of knowledge, a humanistic technology that will explore the conditions of various worlds in comparative perspectives. The virtual multiverse, the multiplicity of universes, can be regulated. Again, it's great simplification, but imagine you have a computer, not computer in the size of a box, but the computer in the size of a room, in the size of a house, in the size of some region of existence, and the worlds that are presented through this screen, invisible screen, are regulated by knobs, adjusting various categories, such as causality, chance, event, action, meta, objectivity, perception, selfness. So the degree of determinism or free play of chance in the given world can be individually projected by philosophically guided users. You can create, there is great dispute between one philosopher and another philosopher, materialist and idealist, voluntarist and subjectivist, solipsist, objectivist, and so on. But now you can create the worlds according to different philosophical principles. You can create Heraclitean universe, Nietzschean universe, Hegelian universe, and so on, by experimenting through their avatars of this multiverse with conditions of different worlds. Users will develop their philosophical self-awareness and better understand the real world in which they live. Practically, it can be imagined at the start as cooperation of information and technology departments with philosophy departments. Already about 10 years ago, IT departments began cooperating with history departments because when they want to build a historical game, for example, set in Shakespearean era, they need consultation of historians. But now even more pertinent would be cooperation of these departments with philosophy, precisely because every world, which is the main unit of philosophical thinking, and the world, which is the main unit of the thinking in terms of informational universes, are converging. So we can explore the possibility of building existentialist and essentialist, materialist and idealist worlds, those of to be and to have, along with Hegelian, Nietzschean, Whiteheadian, and Heideggerian worlds. The worlds of yet undescribed qualities can be synthesized experimentally by the modification and combination of various categories. So the very role of philosopher now changes because he is the designer of the world in this practical dimension of philosophy. And this radically changes the profession, I would say, the vocation of philosopher. In the past, the philosopher pronounced the last word about the world, consummating it in thought. Hegel was fond of repeating the maxim that the owl of Minerva spreads its wings only with the falling of the dusk, after the historical day, full of practical accomplishments of workers, warriors, and inventors, comes to an end. In the world of tomorrow, just the opposite. The philosopher will more closely resemble a lark or even a rooster, proclaiming the first word about something that has never existed before, but which may come into existence. And the professions, of course, of those who make programmatic calculations, of engineers, of designers, they are, of course, extremely important for the enactment, materialization of these worlds. But philosopher comes the first because he initiates or she initiates a new world. Philosopher as a philosophical engineer or a world designer. The technological progress prepares a new role for the philosopher as a world designer. Along with genetically modified organisms, we can talk now about philosophically modified worlds. The 20th century was an age of physical experiments. The 21st century might become an age of philosophical experiments related, for instance, to the problems of free will, the role of chance, and various identity paradoxes related to twins, doubles, and clones. For example, these are technosophical questions. Technosophical means synthesizing technology and philosophy. So I call this field technosophy, not theosophy, not anthroposophy, but technosophy. These kind of questions. Am I responsible for the actions of an individual who is genetically identical to myself and who has been cloned at my command? With the creation of wireless links between human brains and external electronics, how will my thoughts impact the surrounding world? If I am enhanced by prostheses that transmit the intentions in my neural signals directly to mighty machines, this enormously increases my responsibility for the contents of my thinking, compared with my thinking, with when my thinking was locked in the cranium. So there are a whole new space for philosophical questions and possible solutions, possible answers that deal with philosophical technologies, with synthesis between physics and philosophy, between technology and philosophy. And therefore, what we need now, practically speaking, about the future of academy, we desperately need departments or centers of creative thinking and schools of the transformative humanities. Formerly, universities were thought to be only the place for science and scholarship. But as you know, along with colleges of arts and sciences, there are schools, practical schools, like School of Law, School of Business, in the structure of any big university, School of Business, School of Theology, School of Medical School, and sometimes engineering school. So these practical creative branches of thinking are more and more legitimate part of contemporary universities. And I would imagine that along with the schools of business and schools of laws, there would be place for the schools of the transformative humanities. If in the traditional academic setting of philosophical departments or comparative literature department, they're very conservative. They don't encourage creative thinking. But along with these purely academic exploratory institutions, there should be place for practical thinking in the humanity in the mode of schools for creative departments for creative writing. About 50 years ago, along with study of literature, what was introduced to the system of universities was the departments of creative writing, which are now everywhere in big universities, where the best writers teach their students how to write novels, how to write poetry, and so on and so on. So it is now legitimate part of the university. I think that in the same way, the legitimate part of the universities of the future would be departments of creative thinking in the humanities. So the task of scientific and academic institutions is not simply the acquisition of knowledge, but intellectual activity in the forms of both knowledge and thinking. And this includes, first, the establishment and systematization of existing facts and principles, and second, the production of new concepts and ideas that are fruitful for the transformation of civilization. This is the end of my presentation. I just want to introduce those books of mine that you may find useful for further reading, for your familiarization with these ideas about the transformative humanities. This is the book in English, The Transformative Humanities, a Manifesto, published in 2012 by Bloomsbury. This is the book «От знания к творчеству, From Knowledge to Creativity, How the Humanities Can Change the World» in Russian. And by the way, quite recently, with Vladislav Tarasenko in Moscow, he built the course called in Russian, Innovations and Invention, How to Move from Knowledge to Creativity. And those of you, or maybe your graduate students who would want to sign to this course, online course, of course, are encouraged to do so. Then recently was published my book, «Будущее гуманитарных наук», The Future of the Humanities. This is designed mostly for students' level of perception. There is a set of 12 popular lectures for students' level. This book is for, I would say, graduate students' level. This is for students. And the last book that I would like to introduce, this is for advanced level. This is «Проективный словарь гуманитарных наук», the projective dictionary of the humanities, where there are more than 400 entries, articles on new concepts in the humanities in the 14 areas, 14 disciplines of the humanities. And now I will be more than happy, so I close my sharing and will be happy to talk with you directly. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mikhail, that was great. Thank you. I'll hand over to Kirill now. So Kirill's going to monitor the discussion.
Yeah, so you can either raise your hand as Sasha just did, or you can physically raise it, or if I miss you, then do put your name in the chat so I catch you afterwards. So Sasha and then Monica.
I'm sorry, I will use, because the sound is a little bit dispersed here, so I will use this.
Sasha, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah. Ah, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Epstein, for this presentation. It's very interesting. And I just finished 2 articles where I actually make reference to your book about the transformative humanities. I think it's a great idea, especially with the article I wrote together with a robotics engineer. Very much is in line with what you see as a encroachment of philosophy and technology. It's very obvious in this area of robotics. You are faced with very basic questions there. But my doubt is a little bit about the role of the philosopher there, because it's not at all the case that the philosophers will introduce something there. They still come afterwards, so to say. They still are the old. This connects to my second question, because you showed at the beginning this schema of nature, society, and culture, asking for the transformative parts, or the transformative disciplines. Technology, politics we had, but we also have the third. It's cultural industry, right? All your examples you brought also today in the presentation, they are examples from the cultural industry. So that's it seems to be a little bit of the problem. I see that you want to introduce the more practical side of the humanities, the outcome, which is left, so to say, to the market or to the people themselves. They find jobs in maybe I don't know, in this cultural industry side, to put this more into the curriculum itself, if I understood right. I think it's a great idea, but still we have to think about how the humanities then actually transform the world, or aren't the rules not still the same old cultural industry rules?
Okay, thank you for your very good questions, and I'll try to respond. So the first question was about the role of the philosopher. Yes, now indeed philosophers are coming not the first in the line regarding, it seems to. But for example, when Steve Jobs introduced the Apple, on several occasions he used to say that in the DNA, in the genes of the Apple, is collaboration of humanists and technologists. So Apple itself is the product of humanistic thinking, which is not, so to say, crystallized in a separate humanistic enterprise as we perceive it to be, but it is integrated in cooperation with design, aesthetic design, some philosophical reasoning, implicit philosophical reasoning is there. And this, what Jobs added, makes sing our hearts in a very elevated way. The fact that Apple is synthesis of all varieties of knowledge. It's not purely technological knowledge, and if you need it, I could provide you with exact citation. The second question about cultural industry. Well, if we are talking about theater, movies, dance, yes, these are not transformative humanities. This is the object of study for the humanities. What I mean by transformative humanities is the practices that are built on the basis of scholarship. You see the difference? For example, let me specify. There was the epoch of symbolism in Russia, for example, yes? Who were Vyacheslav Ivanov, Dmitry Merezhkovsky, Andrei Belый. On the one hand, they were writers, poets, yes? They wrote poetry, they wrote prose. This is quite understandable. On the other hand, they were theoreticians, because Andrei Belый wrote about the problems, poetics, about the problems of rhythm, history of verses. Ivanov wrote about the myths and so on. This is their second hypothesis. But was the third hypothesis, and most important in this regard, is that they were creators of Russian symbolism. And this cannot be reduced to their activities as poets or as theoreticians. This is precisely the field of transformative humanities, creating a new epoch of writing, of vision, of painting, of music, and so on. So there is, because my presentation was so short, I couldn't develop into some areas, but there should be clearly differentiated transformative humanities from the so-called applied humanities. For example, libraries, museums, these are applied humanities. This is one of the names of this field. And this is part of cultural industry. But this is not transformative humanities. Transformative humanities is about humanistic inventions. If cultural industry is about humanistic inventions, that's fair, that's great. I don't preclude that some part of cultural industry may deal with inventions, humanistic inventions. But much of it is simply art, simply literature, simply opera, simply ballet. So those varieties of arts that are studied by the humanities.
Thank you. And Monica, and then Cecile, I think. And then, yeah. Monica, are you able to unmute yourself?
I don't hear.
Monica, you're still muted. Please let us know in the chat if you're having problems typing your question. Oh,
she's unmuted now.
You were unmuted for a second, and now you've muted yourself again.
See. Hi.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I don't have any question. I think it was just an accident. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Cecile, did you have a question? You're not muted, but we can't hear you.
Is it all right now?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's actually, it does relate to what Sasha was asking about, and this kind of
Oh, no. It's frozen.
And hello?
You froze for.
Oh, is it bad? Is it all right now? Okay.
Yes.
So yes, when at the beginning of presentation you were talking about the three different kinds of sciences: nature, nature, society, and culture. I was wondering if there you would put education. And as you were talking about education and pedagogy, and as you were talking about answering to Sasha, I feel that, you know, how do you see like this transformative aspect of cultural reproduction? And actually in a pedagogical relationship, there is this kind of choosing and the kind of moral aspect of why we do and how we choose to reproduce things that is very important. So I was wondering if you could kind of expand a little bit on that.
Well, thank you for your question. I do not think that education can be viewed as this transformative practices that are specific for the humanities, because we have education in sciences, we have education in social sciences, and we have education in the humanities. So education as such is not specifically this specific type of activity that is peculiar to the humanities. It is not transformative humanities. Yeah.
Can I just quickly
you went mute again, I'm afraid.
Sorry, then maybe instead of education, I would use the word pedagogy. And I think that the word of Vilienkov is actually could be quite relevant to that. So I don't know if it would make a difference.
Well, to a certain extent, pedagogy, Ilyenkov's mode of pedagogy was extension of his philosophy. In this sense, it is transformative. Of course, it is an example of transformative philosophy because it deals with not just with education, but with raising certain philosophical issues about the relationship between the mental and the social, the internal and external, nature, nurture, and so on and so on. Yes, it is. But insofar as it is not just education, but so to say, philosophy of education and practice.
Thank you very much. Yanis, then Svetlana.
Yes, hello. Firstly, I want to congratulate Professor Epstein for the very interesting and profound presentation. My question is related to Thomas Kuhn theory and some implication in this with the content of this presentation. Thomas Kuhn, for example, he described the scientific paradigms, and we can extend this scientific paradigm to philosophical paradigms. So we can determine in each era, a philosophical era, in each period of society, a major philosophical concept that is predominant during a specific years, decades, and time. For example, a major concept during the German idealism, but also in the 19th century, was the system, the concept of system, and also the concept, and especially the concept of organic system. Also, during the decade of 60s and then until our days, there's a huge discussion about the major concept, philosophical concept, about the concept of the philosophical concept of network. For example, in Italian operaism, but also in other thinkers like Castells, for example, they claim that the major philosophical system to understand our modern world is the concept of network. I would like to, from your presentation, are you consider that we are we have now a kind of transition to another main philosophical concept from this of network? We can talk about a kind of transcend of these philosophical concepts.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for your question. As you know, in the humanities, the paradigms are much more soft than in sciences. So they are not as articulated. And the change, the succession of these paradigms cannot be traced as clearly as in hard sciences. However, I do believe that in the humanities, as we know them today, what is going on is a huge paradigmatic shift. And this is shift from, as I said, pure scholarship and exploration to transformative thinking. And in terms of more specific terms of philosophy, it is the shift from analytical philosophy to what I call philosophy of synthesis. And for those of you who read Russian, I could refer to my article, which is called From Analysis to Synthesis on the Vocation of Philosophy in the 21st Century, published exactly a year ago in Вопросы философии, Questions of Philosophy, with a huge discussion in the same issue. And now it has been translated and will be published in a month in English as well. So I believe, and we haven't discussed it, that analytical philosophy as it prevailed all Anglo-American and increasingly continental philosophy in the 20th and early 21st centuries, is now receding into the past. It doesn't mean that analytical instruments, and this is paradigmatic shift, it doesn't mean that analysis has to be relegated completely to the past. But each element of analysis has to be problematized in order that new synthesis could emerge on the basis of existing entities, which we analyze, linguistic judgments, or logical judgments, new disciplines, old disciplines. We analytically dissect these logical entities, and then by problematizing their elements, we compose a new synthesis, new disciplines, new areas of study, new concepts, new terms, new visions. And again, вопросы философии, July 2019, this is where you can find the discussion.
You're muted.
Sorry. So it's Svetlana and then Sigrid. No.
Thank you, Kirill. Hello, everyone. I'm Svetlana Bodronova from St. Petersburg State University of Russia. And thank you, Mikhail, very much. Again, very thought-provoking as practically everything that you write. And we try to follow. I've got a couple of notes and a question. My first note is that I couldn't help thinking of the joyful science, веселая наука, as put by Dmitry Likhachev or any other person who uses this word. I think there must be this aspect of joyful science in what we try to do as transformative humanities. And I think this probably needs to be elaborated on a bit more to make it a real philosophical concept rather than just a joke among the scholars. My second note is, as a communication scholar, I often witness something that we call normalization. When platforms just started, online communication platforms just started, like social networks, for example, YouTube, whatever, everyone expected it to transform our ways of communication very much. But the more we looked at it, like within the last 15 years, say, the more we looked at it, the more we saw how quicker and quicker communication became very similar to that offline. And now, the more we go, sort of with time, normalization comes quicker. What I mean by normalization is that all the discrepancies and all the differences that are there in offline communication, all the disparities, social disparities are there. So there is, we are still us. It's like us, and we are still not that disintegrated in terms of our identity as we expected us to be or to become. We are still considering us ourselves. So we're still integral when we communicate. Given this, my question would be, isn't it the goal of transformative humanities to think over if we want to have multiple humanities, multiple humanity, so to say, multiple options for humanity at all? Do we need to think what we take with us and what we avoid to take with us, what we avoid taking with us? Isn't it the goal of the scholars, so to say, of transformative humanities to have this in mind? Because probably there's much that we don't want to take with us in our new humanities, so to say, new forms of humanity. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Svetlana. Well, two questions. First about Nietzsche and gay science. Yes, the merriful science, the science that marries one's heart. Yes, of course. The point is that this traditional humanities, and in particular its crowning achievement, deconstruction, they dealt with the feeling of suspicion. It was expression of suspicion and of increasingly critical approach to the text. I would say critical to the point of disgrace, disbelief, and contempt to the text. I think that the new humanities will be built on a different emotional, so to say, foundation, much more positive. I call it philognosis. That means love and knowledge, yes? Because you, in my view, you have to love the object of your study. You have to be in love with it, in love with this text, in love with this writer, in love with this philosophy. And what loves want? Loves want, according to Plato, to give birth in interaction with what you love. And this fruitful love, love that generates new entities, new textual unities, is what the philosophy of synthesis is about. It's not just about analysis. It's not just about problematization. It is the next stage, creating new unities, new judgments, new disciplines, new worldviews, new terms, new concepts. This was my preoccupation for many years already. So I think that precisely this kind of science, which will be much more cheerful, much more constructive, not only intellectually, but emotionally. And as for your other question, it's a difficult question. Of course, we are only 25, 30 years into this new ways of online communication. For myself, I opened this world 25 years ago, 1995, and immediately as I saw internet, it was May of 1995, I immediately thought it will be a new instrument for thinking. And immediately I constructed IntelNet, intellectual network. And this is one of my projects of the late 90s, IntelNet. All my addresses, by the way, at Emory universities have in their address have Emory IntelNet, intellectual network. But we are still in the earliest stage of it. If the virtual worlds are now in the same stage in which cinema was at the stage when the peak of achievement was demonstrating how a train approaches a station, you know. So reproducing the picture of the offline world, of the real world. And that's why the role of philosopher, it's also responding to one of the previous questions, the role of philosopher cannot be very clearly articulated at this stage because we are not still creating these worlds. We are still more reproducing the existing worlds, like the early cinema reproduced. So this is the question. We are at the earliest stage. We cannot, so to say, to die in our old flesh and to resurrect immediately in our new virtual flesh. Regarding the multiplicity of humanities, this is a very painful issue, which, as you know, was described by Strugatsky, for example, in the concept of ludi and ludens, that means people and over people, you know. It's a very difficult question. I hope not. I hope not. I believe in one humanity. Mm-hmm.
So we have got, I think it was Carol next, and then Paul, and then I'm going to abuse my chairing responsibility and sneak one in as well.
There was Sigurd as well.
Oh, sorry,
Carol.
sorry, I missed. Oh, is it
Sigurd?
Oh, sorry.
After Carol, I think.
Carol.
Okay, you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mikhail Epstein. It was a very stimulating lecture, and I'm in Oslo. Actually, I tried to get the local library, the university library, to book your, to get your books. Had a little discussion with my philosophers because I'm not on an assignment there.
In which library and city are you?
It's Oslo,
Also, yeah, of course.
University Library of Oslo. So they told me that due to budgets and so on, these requests should come from researchers by the university. So I contacted my professor from my master degree, but they wouldn't like to request your books. Actually, they found it a bit too culturological. I mean, it's only an example because I think what you say about this idea of departments of creative thinking, it's this institutionalist approach. You need institutions, not only these ideas, but it's fresh so I have two questions. What kind of do you have any embryos, some kind of models existing of this kind of departments of creative thinking anywhere? And my second question is due to your book, The Phoenix of Soviet Philosophy, I think it's called, yeah?
Phoenix of Philosophy.
The Phoenix of Philosophy, yeah. Mm-hmm. But as I understand, it's you as a Russian scholar. I mean, myself, I did this master degree in Russian, and I had the pleasure to discover the Soviet methodologists, the Moscow Methodological Circle, and yeah, it's a wide variety. And I had 2 nice days in Moscow in the late 90s meeting them. But it's rather shocking for me that this whole heritage, this whole history, is that we are so ignorant and we don't know anything about it. It was opening some doors for myself and for these professors I mentioned. I'm still in contact with. But so that was my request. I would like the library to, because I don't have this book on the Phoenix of Philosophy.
So what is your second question?
No, I just wonder what do you think from seeing both the Western humanities and this strange for us obscure sort of but dialectical tradition of Soviet philosophy, Ilyenkov. Where do you see the roots coming from for this for your idea, for your manifesto and where will we see these departments of creative thinking?
Okay, thank you. First, I would like to draw attention to Carol Emerson. It seems that she was offering some question as well, Carol Emerson. So I would hope that she will be able to ask her questions. Responding to you, you see, first idea comes, then institutions. Regarding the existing institutions, I can cite my own example. I was invited to Durham University in England to initiate, to create, and to direct the Center for Humanities Innovation for 3 years, which I did from 2012 to 2015. And we have done a pretty diverse work. You could find some traces of this work on the site, Center for Humanities Innovation, Durham University. It is still there. In particular, we convened an international conference, 40 presenters from many countries of the world, where the genre of the presentation was only manifesto, 40 manifestos. That means, I did mention this, but manifesto in my view is one of these transformative genres which doesn't fit fiction category, it doesn't fit scholarship category. It is precisely genre of transformative humanities, and those manifestos, as I mentioned, in literature and philosophy, were the ground for the majority of innovative ideas in all disciplines, rather than research monographs and so on and so on. So we have some experiment, we have some experience, but of course, the first idea, which I suggest, which I offer, by the way, at this very moment, to organize, to create such institutions, such centers, such departments, such schools for the transformative humanities. And regarding your second question, it would be too long a conversation about Soviet philosophy and Western philosophy and how they relate. And this is my book on, actually this is the first volume that was published, The Phoenix of Philosophy, Russian Thought of the Late Soviet Period, because it embraces only 4 schools: Marxism, structuralism and semiotics, phenomenology, and culturology, and also personalism and existentialism. And by the way, Russian culturology, one of founders of which was Mikhail Bakhtin, I would say is an enormous contribution into the humanities, very different from what cultural studies is, much less politicized, much more holistic. So in some of my books, including those published in English, like the Transcultural Experiments, the book of 1999, I rely on the legacy of Russian Soviet culturology. And the second volume of this book is coming. I'm just working on it, which will be devoted to religious philosophy, to nationalism, to mysticism, and to postmodernism, to 4 other movements.
Thanks a lot. And Carol?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Hello, Carol.
Hello. First, I'd like to answer, or try to answer Sigurd's excellent question about why we don't know about what really happened during the second half of the Soviet century. And I think that is because Sovietologists have become lazy, were lazy, and they could not see any category beyond collaborationist and dissident. What they didn't see is that most thinkers are survivors. And they survive by a number of extraordinary techniques, all of which Misha has been wonderfully creative in trying to outline for us. But this leads me to my next question, and this is to Misha himself. Yes, we need new schools. Yes, you have presented ways in which existing universities and colleges can provide such forums. What is in it for the existing corporate university to certify any of this? How do they get teachers who have degrees to teach it? It's the market, it's profit that runs. It's true that there are market industries such as the entertainment industry that have had to move from LPs to CDs to things that fit on your thumbnail. And this has meant that the performing arts have become extraordinarily more complex and less profit driven. How can a university or higher education network respond to this challenge, or are you really envisaging in the next post-pandemic decade an entirely different way of educating ourselves as humanists?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a good question. I'm not strong in terms of marketing and business, but I mean, what would be the real, I don't know, strategies for finding jobs for these transformative humanists? Nevertheless, I believe that this is the area that will expand enormously, and maybe precisely as in the aftermath of this anthropos, as I call it, this anthropological pause, these 2 or 3 months of our new reality which we encountered recently. For example, if we discuss Russian situation, which is familiar to many participants, and actually for all participants, because this is the end of society, Russian language is in a state of awful stagnation. It needs many creative initiatives, language, which is the main informational instrument of the society. When for the first time you have heard about new Russian word coined in Russian, acquiring some international reputation of meaning since perestroika and glasnost? Nothing. Whereas the main expert of each nation, of each cultural nation, is its language. So creatively endowed linguists could think about not translating every English word into rotten, distorted Russian, but about moving creatively from the roots of Russian language and making grammar and vocabulary more appropriate for the 21st century. And for, I would say that if Russian government would be smart enough, it would invest into this enterprise more, or at least no less than into oil or gas, because this is what makes the nation internationally recognized. Linguistic achievements, linguistic capacity, and the international status and influence of the United States is in huge extent due to the impact of English language, of course. This is one example. It is one example why Russian universities, for example, should compete for creating these departments, centers for linguistic creativity. As for philosophical creativity, it has, I would say, a very direct relation to the needs of artificial intelligence and informational technologies. Because indeed, while we are departing from the primitive earlier stage of virtual worldness, which just reproduces what we have in this world, we are moving to the construction of new worlds. And the philosophers, truly creative philosophers, who possess philosophical imagination, who can operate creatively with universals, properties, qualities, disciplines, models of thinking, they are the ones who much better than current constructors of primitive games would be responsible for creating these truly alternative worlds using the legacy of Heraclitus, Plato, Aristotle, Hegel, Kant, and so on. So I think there is huge, and as in industry, not cultural industry, but industry, will be more and more dependent on robots, on machines, on artificial intelligence, the professions that can be expected to prosper in the 21st centuries. These are not of accountants or financial analysts. These are professions that are irreducible, humanistic professions, and including that of the priest, according to some projections. And this is poet, linguist, philosopher, culturologist, and so on and so on. Irreducible professions, irreducibly humanistic professions. So I think that the most intelligent universities with the most intelligent and future-oriented administration would very much be, should be, it's my maybe wishful thinking, should be very responsive to this kind of projections of new transformative institution of in the humanities.
Great, so we don't want to go over too much, so Paul, and then I do also want to sneak in a question, and we'll see if we...
Mikhail, thank you very much for your presentation, very stimulating. But I see your project not an evolutionary project, I see it as a revolutionary project. So in my view, as a result of that kind of standpoint, and following on from what Carol said, I think the project needs to operate outside of the present academy. I think the present academy is part of the problem and not the solution. So I think it's too narrowly based and perhaps incapable of looking outwards in the way that you suggest. So I think that I would ask you this question, what about an independent global institution for transformative humanities? I think you said yourself it was wishful thinking in your previous remarks, perhaps wishful thinking. Well, let's not try and find out if it is wishful thinking. What about creating a global project for transformative humanities independent of the academy? I know it's a big challenge and a big project, but that's my question. Thank you.
Can you help with this? Thank you. Can you help with this?
I could send you £2.50. I think that's about it.
Well, I would be happy to embrace your vision and to I agree that existing academic structures are too conservative, though the fact that they incorporated creative writing is some glitter of hope. But nevertheless, let's try always. Let's try to build a non-academic institution for transformative humanities. I think that universities still possess those resources and which are part of the problem, but may become part of the solution of the problem. Maybe, who knows? But I am. This is one of, I would say, provocative goals of my presentation. Let's do it. Let's not just think about it, but let's try to do it. If you are really, as you said, inspired by these possibilities, if you feel that it is something that needs to be accomplished, at least in a certain experimental way.
Thanks. I'm a human-computer interaction researcher, and definitely in my field, philosophy is becoming more and more relevant, and we have an approach called design fiction, which is the sort of thing that you're suggesting, combining imagination with philosophy for the purpose of later affecting design. But we have a saying that we use to kind of make fun of developers, which we say as a joke, which is, if you build it, they will come. And what that means is two things. The first is kind of trivial, which is that most designers designers assume that it'll be used and it's never used. That's not so important. The other thing that it means is it's highlighting how designers are often disconnected from the human. They build something for the sake of building it, which is interesting, but it then has consequences, ethical consequences, that they deny responsibility for. So they might, for example, build a massive multiplayer online game, but then it turns out that it makes kids more lonely rather than less lonely to play that game. So I wondered, like, don't the humanities also have a responsibility to work out the ethical implications of the imagination? And then also, it's hard because although there is all this imagination, that focusing on the human is quite unusual, because there are contemporary approaches that are similar to yours, but are like a darkened version, following Deleuze. What you call unusual, they call weird, and there's also an idea of like exit, but they are anti-humanist. So I wonder how you fit into the kind of because lots of the people who you cite are anti-humanist as well. So the humanist, anti-humanist, and do humanities not also have an ethical responsibility for the consequences of their invention?
Thank you. Well, I do agree that the humanities should take ethical responsibility, but ethical responsibility doesn't mean that we should be released from some negative emotions like loneliness. Actually, philosophy develops in people, and those who study philosophy and devote themselves to philosophy, a kind of loneliness, a kind of stance of being reflective, meditative, and so on. It's not bad. All space, all range of human emotions can be involved in our preoccupations with philosophy, including philosophical anger, philosophical surprise, and as you know, philosophy is born of surprise, according to Aristotle. So philosophical melancholy and so on and so on. It's not something that we should prevent. Philosophy is not a pill of Prozac, you know, to make you happy. As for your your second question, could you articulate it once again briefly?
Okay, so following Deleuze, who you partly built on, there are lots of contemporary thinkers who also focus on
anti-humanism. Yes, I recall. Yes, anti-humanism. Well, in one of chapters of my book, I discriminate between three positions. One is post-humanist, and another, and this is something that I dislike actually. Catherine Hayles, who published her book How We Became Post-Human in 1999. Actually, what she meant, and I met with her on several occasions, and it is clear also from her book, that it is not that we became post-human. We became post-biological humans, and this is very different, you know, because actually humans became post-biological thousands years ago. Belonging to history, belonging to culture is actually belonging to some post-biological dimension. So we should use words discriminately, and she misused this word post-human. Like many people, like Kurzweil, sometimes Ray Kurzweil uses this. My position is not anti-humanist, but it also is not anti-technicist. My position is techno-humanism. I expanded on this, elaborated on this in my book, both in English. There is a special chapter in Transformative Humanity devoted to techno-humanism. Technology expands human possibilities, like art expands, like literature expands, writing expands. And, you know, Plato, who wrote a lot, at the same time believed that writing is a corruption of human thinking, you know. We shouldn't think that technology is a corruption of human being, a corruption of human thinking, because all modes of externality, of practical extension of human spirit, of human technology, are potentially positively expanding humanity itself, and there is nothing bad about it. So I disagree with, very radically disagree with anti-humanistic stance of Foucault. I find them less in, though find sometimes in Deleuze, but I don't see why technology as such can be thought to be anti-human or anti-humanistic. This is not the case.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who asked a question. I think we're passing back to Karina now.
Thank you very much, Carol, for facilitating this, and thank you again, Mikhail. It's been really fantastic meeting. I think you've actually given us a lot of new thoughts and possibly an expanded role for the International Friends of Ilyenkov. We can expand our role in the direction that you have outlined, bearing in mind that we only know each other because of Ilyenkov. And you've sort of outlined new ways that we can begin to educate ourselves and make this connection and transition between the ideal and the real, between the utopian and the real, which is really what I see this is about.